Hi, I'm Judith. I was raised to stay quiet, to be polite, even when it hurt. At dinner that night, my mother found out I had $14 million. My father slammed his glass and said, "You owe us everything." They didn't ask how I earned it. They asked how fast I'd sign it over. And just when they thought they had me cornered, my billionaire husband walked in. What happened next? No one at that table saw coming. Sunday dinners at my parents' house in the suburbs of Texas had a rhythm, a suffocating, familiar rhythm I had learned to stomach over the years. I walked through the door with my husband beside me, my fingers already clenched inside my coat pocket, bracing for the usual jabs dressed up as concern. My mother greeted us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her hug perfunctory. "Judith, you look tired," she said, as if my exhaustion was a personal failure. My sister, Dana, leaned across the kitchen island, grinning. "Still rocking that work-from-home life, huh?" She eyed her Rolex, which she never failed to display at just the right angle. I smiled politely, said nothing. This wasn't new. I'd always played the peacekeeper. I've always been the one who kept my mouth shut to keep the peace. The dining room hadn't changed since I was a teenager. Same heavy chairs, same creaky chandelier. Only now, the tension was thicker. My father sat at the head of the table, sharpening a steak knife like he was prepping for something more than dinner. The meal began with roast and sarcasm. Dana bragged about her husband's promotion, glancing sideways at mine. "Guess that Ivy League tuition paid off, huh?" My mother sipped her wine and tilted her head toward me. "You still doing that little blog of yours?" she asked, emphasizing little like a knife between the ribs. My father chuckled. "We raised two daughters. One turned out to be a surgeon's wife. The other, well, she means well." My husband stayed silent. He didn't know the full history. He thought we were here for a meal. I tried to shift the topic to their garden renovations, but I was cut off by Dana's laugh. "You still renting that old place downtown?" Every attempt I made to redirect the conversation was drowned out. My fork clinked against the plate louder than I expected. I kept smiling. My hands were shaking under the tablecloth. Then came the moment I'll never forget. My father cleared his throat and laid a printed spreadsheet on the table like it was a business meeting. "I thought this would be a good time," he said, "to look at what each of you has contributed over the years." Dana smirked. My mother looked down, feigning surprise. He went down the list. Vacations Dana had paid for, money her husband had sent, even the refrigerator they bought 2 years ago. Then he looked up. "And Judith," he said, pausing for effect, "you haven't given anything substantial." The room went quiet. My breath caught. "That's not entirely fair," my husband said, his voice low. But no one listened. My father folded his arms. "You always act like you've got nothing. Like you're struggling. Maybe it's time you stop pretending." I didn't respond. Couldn't. My chest tightened. My ears rang. A memory surfaced. The hospital bill from years ago, $38,000. My mother's surgery. I paid it without telling anyone. Not for credit, because she was my mother. No one knew. No one ever asked. And then, it got worse. My mother, smiling now in a way that made my stomach turn, reached into her purse and pulled out a piece of paper. "I found this in one of your old mail envelopes," she said, holding it up. "A bank statement. With my name, my balance, $14.2 million. The room exploded in gasps. "You've been hiding this from us?" Dana's voice was sharp. My father grabbed the paper. $14 million? His face turned red. "You've been sitting on a fortune while we begged you for help with the new roof?" I looked at my mother. She said nothing, just folded her hands like a judge who already handed down a sentence. It wasn't the money that hurt me, it was the betrayal. My family began to circle like sharks. "You let us think you were poor. You lied. You're just like your father's side. Selfish. My husband reached over, took my hand. First time that night, he touched me. I had reasons, I whispered, but they weren't listening. Inside, I felt something shifting. Not rage, not shame, something deeper. The end of pretending. The flashbacks came uninvited. Dana taking credit for my ideas in school. My father laughing when I got my first job. My mother crying on the phone that night about the hospital bill. Never asking how I got the money, only that it was paid. I had played small for too long. You can be quiet for years, until the silence becomes unbearable. I looked at my husband. He met my eyes, and I gave him a nod. A simple one. Enough. Then the front door opened. Everyone turned. He walked in, calm as ever. My husband, who had stepped outside minutes earlier to take a call. He didn't look at me, didn't greet anyone. He just walked to the head of the table, opened a leather folder, and dropped it beside my father's wine glass. "Let's talk facts," he said. Everyone froze. The air felt heavier as we left the dining room. My husband walked ahead, calm and unreadable, the folder still tucked under his arm. I followed behind him, the rest of them trailing like spectators at a show they thought they were still directing. My father straightened his shoulders the moment we stepped into the formal living room. The fake warmth returned to his face, like he'd just remembered the cameras weren't rolling and he needed to act decent. But I knew that look. It wasn't kindness, it was calculation. My mother leaned toward Dana, whispering something behind her hand. She didn't realize I caught the exchange, but I did. They weren't shocked at the money. They were stunned at being outplayed. Money doesn't expose people. It just strips the mask faster. My father cleared his throat, eyes darting between the guests now seated awkwardly around the room. "I had plans," he began, his voice dressed in honey, "to transfer part of the family estate to you, Judith." Eventually, I didn't respond. I waited, because that sentence wasn't finished. "But now that we know you've been blessed," he continued, "it only makes sense that you give back. Help your family. We raised you, fed you, educated you." He said it like it was a bill long overdue. My mother chimed in, her voice delicate but sharp. "Your father worked 2 jobs to send you to college. I cooked every meal, remember? We didn't have help. We sacrificed." They were naming their price. I looked around the room and caught my brother's nod. Subtle, but familiar. He'd known. They'd talked, planned, behind my back. This wasn't family. This was business. I wasn't a daughter. I was a balance sheet. And I was supposed to sign the check. They called it obligation. I called it extortion in pearls and polo shirts. I sat still, but inside, I was pacing the floor of my own memory. Years ago, long before I met my husband, I had a dream. It was messy, uncertain, and bigger than anything I'd dared before. I needed $10,000 to launch my first platform. Just 10. I remember asking my father. He laughed. Not a gentle chuckle, a mean, mocking one. "Judith, people like us don't build businesses. We work. You want fantasy? Go write a book." So I built it anyway, alone. I worked nights, saved every penny, and cried quietly on the bathroom floor when it all felt like too much. They didn't see that version of me. Now that it worked, now that it was profitable, he wanted credit, as if he'd planted the seed when he'd actually trampled the soil. They'll ignore your ambition until it threatens their comfort. I had just begun to process that when Dana's voice pierced the room. "I already talked to him," she said, motioning toward my husband. My head turned before I could stop it. "What?" She crossed her arms. "About my startup. He said he'd consider investing." I looked at him. He nodded slowly, then said, "She called. I didn't move forward. You asked me to keep families separate." Dana scoffed. "So now she controls what you do with your money?" "No," he said simply. "But I respect her boundaries." She spun it like venom. "Wow. So, Judith's rules, Judith's money, Judith's ego, nothing new." My mother backed her up. "You've always been territorial, even as a child, afraid someone might take something of yours." My father chimed in too, now fully leaning into the narrative. "You're not generous, Judith. You're possessive." They were good. I'll give them that. I looked around the room and realized this wasn't about wealth. It was about control. And I wasn't playing the part they wrote for me anymore. I sat back in the chair, let the silence stretch. Then I spoke. "I won't be manipulated. Not by guilt, not by rewriting history." My voice didn't tremble. It echoed. "This isn't about family. This is about access. And I'm not a bank." They stared at me like I'd grown horns. "You want to talk about sacrifices? Fine. I sacrificed my pride when I paid your bills in secret. I sacrificed holidays to build a future no one believed in. And I sacrificed years pretending this was love." My mother gasped. "Family doesn't entitle you to someone else's peace of mind." No one moved. No one spoke. I could feel the weight of their expectations beginning to crack, not just in them, but in me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. I stood slowly. If this is what love looks like in this house, then maybe I've been an orphan longer than I thought. The room froze. My mother, ever the actress, narrowed her eyes. "You're being dramatic." I looked at her, then reached into my purse. A folded piece of paper, soft from being opened and closed too many times. I held it up, steady. "I think it's time I read you something you forgot I had." When I walked into the study, they didn't flinch. My father and mother were seated, heads bent over a stack of papers, mid-discussion. Their tone hushed, but sharp. My name wasn't said aloud, but I felt it, like cold air when someone stops talking the moment you step into a room. My mother glanced up, forcing a tight smile. "We think you should reconsider your stance," she said gently. Too gently. The ledger on the desk sat open, its page blank. I stared at it for a beat. Symbolic, maybe. Or just convenient. I sat down across from them, slow and deliberate. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to listen and remember. The last time I took their word without question, I paid for it with years of silence. I wasn't that woman anymore. "You've left us no choice," my father began, voice calm, rehearsed. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk toward me. His hands didn't shake. Mine didn't move. "This is the updated family trust. It outlines a revised clause. And nothing personal, just business." I opened it slowly. The words blurred at first, then cleared. The clause read, "Failure to participate in family stewardship activities or cooperate with legacy planning will result in forfeiture of all estate claims. Said forfeiture will default to designated successor, Morel Ilban Maynard." I read it out loud, word for word. My sister's name hit like a slap. Morel didn't blink. She folded her arms and leaned back. "Balance and fairness," she said softly. "Why is that so hard for you?" My mother winced, like the mask she'd worn was too tight now. "It's about preserving what we've built," she added. "What they built. They wrote me out of this family before I ever spoke," I thought. I closed the folder. Didn't say a word. The next morning, I was in my attorney's office downtown. Neutral gray walls, a glass desk, no family photos, no loaded glances, just law. He reviewed every version of the will I had on file. Compared signatures, dates. He flagged 4 documents with concern. "These 2 here," he said, tapping with his pen, "look modified after the fact. There's no witness on this one. This one's backdated." I asked, "What does it mean?" He leaned back. "It means someone tried to rewrite history quietly." "Where's the original?" He paused. "Your grandmother's safety deposit box, if it's still there." So even before I opened my mouth, they'd started rearranging the walls around me, just in case I became a problem. Not a daughter, a liability. Back at the house later that day, I walked in just as Morel stood with a thin smile on her face. "I suppose now's a good time to mention, I have a silent partner," she said, glancing at our father. 20% of your equity," she added. "It's already filed." I felt something twist in my chest. "You did what?" I asked quietly. Father cleared his throat. "We insisted. It's a prudent measure. Just a safeguard, nothing more." My voice didn't rise. I didn't yell. But inside, the last thread holding me to the idea of us snapped. "This isn't about wealth," I said to myself. "It's about who gets to say they made me." They were rewriting everything, not just wills, not just shares, but identity. I stood tall, the chair creaking beneath me. "You built your legacy on me," I said. "Now you try to cage me with paper?" My mother opened her mouth to respond. I raised my hand slightly. She stopped. "This conversation is over. I'm not negotiating with bad faith." I turned to my attorney. "From this moment on, no document moves without your approval, and we're requesting a third-party review of every file." I looked at the room. My mother's pinched expression, my sister's smug silence, my father's mask of concern. "You can't punish me for standing up." At that moment, Morel gave a nod to someone behind my attorney. A young assistant entered, holding a sealed envelope. She walked over and handed it to me. The front read, "Family Trust, Original Will." My hands trembled, but not from fear. I opened it slowly. The pages fell open. There it was, a name I hadn't heard in years. The house was quiet, too quiet. It was past midnight, the kind of stillness that makes every creak of the floorboard feel like a verdict. I sat alone in my office, that envelope still open in front of me. The original will. My name on it. But not just mine. There, under the paragraph detailing successor rights, was a name I hadn't expected. Eleanor Davenport. My grandmother. Next to it, in a slanted script I knew by heart, was a handwritten edition. A codicil, not typed, not notarized, but unmistakably hers. If my granddaughter Judith Davenport is ever in conflict with her parents regarding the estate, she shall be considered the sole heir to my portion, in full. I blinked at it. And again, this wasn't a technicality. This wasn't a note. It was a legal directive, one they never mentioned, one they deliberately ignored. A memory surfaced, her voice, clear as ever, saying over tea once, "Don't ever let them drown your light just so they can stay afloat." They didn't just rewrite history. They erased her love. I felt heat crawl up my throat. Not rage, not yet. Just betrayal that sat bone deep. They buried her wishes the same way they buried my voice, in the name of control. I let my fingers trail over the ink. It hadn't faded, but I almost had. That took me back to the night I turned 21. She'd pulled me into her sewing room, away from the noise of my own birthday dinner. "This is for when they try to take everything," she'd whispered, pressing a small, unmarked envelope into my hand. I had tucked it away, forgotten, or maybe refused to believe it would ever be necessary. It had been inside the will, folded flat. Inside that envelope now was a short letter, written in her neat block style. Judith, blood is not loyalty, character is. You were never theirs to break. You are mine to protect. If this is in your hands, then they've started taking what isn't theirs. Don't let them. You don't owe silence to liars. I didn't cry at first. I just sat there. Then it came. Quiet, but steady. Not grief. Clarity. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I wiped my face, stood up, and went to the kitchen. Poured a glass of water. Came back and opened my laptop. I scanned the codicil, sent it directly to David, my attorney. No subject line, just one word in the body. Urgent. Within 15 minutes, he replied, "We need to meet first thing. This changes everything." I picked up my phone, called the bank, froze the trust account temporarily. No notice to the family. No warning. You don't warn people who already loaded the gun. David followed up. The codicil, though handwritten, held weight, especially if paired with a witness or contextual evidence. I looked up at my shelves, dozens of journals, cards, handwritten notes from her. I had more than context. I had legacy. Still, I kept my next move quiet. Silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. 2 days later, I met Lila at the diner we used to frequent after law school exams. She looked the same, tired in the eyes, but warm in the smile. "God, you look like you haven't slept in 3 days," she said, handing me a coffee. 4, I replied. I didn't tell her everything. Just enough. She didn't need all the details to understand the shape of what I was carrying. She shook her head. I always knew they were calculated, but I didn't think they'd go this far. They underestimated how whole I became without them, she added after a beat, her hand resting briefly on mine. That sentence stayed with me. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was reclaiming. That night, back at home, I sat at my desk. No music, no wine, just me and the sound of pen on paper. I wrote 2 letters, one to Morel, one to my parents. I didn't mail them. I didn't even seal them. Just placed them inside a file with the codicil, the will, and the original letter from Eleanor. Closure isn't what you give them. It's what you refuse to carry. On a fresh sheet, I wrote a checklist. Transfer personal assets. Secure independent evaluator. Block any further financial access. Review guardianship clauses. Retain sole counsel. At the bottom, 1 sentence. Alone, underlined twice. Do not let your hurt make you dishonest. That line kept me centered. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for truth. Just as I was placing the file into the drawer, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A calm male voice said, "This is James Barnes from Central Security Trust. We received a request to access your dormant trust account. Were you aware of this authorization?" I froze. No, I wasn't. Understood. We've placed a temporary hold pending verification. I thanked him, hung up, stood still. Then I walked to my laptop, opened a new document, titled it, Timeline of Their Lies. They say Sunday morning is for faith, but they forgot to tell me whose faith, theirs or mine. The message from my mother had come early. Please join us this Sunday. It matters for appearances. I stared at my phone, heart heavy with suspicion, but I dressed calmly. Not for redemption, to study the wolves. I arrived at the old church, stepping into the familiar sanctuary with my husband at my side. The pews smelled of polished wood and candle wax, faces turned, some curious, some judging. My father sat in the front row, shoulders squared, as though waiting for me to act out. Dana smiled too sweetly, nodding at me as if they were congratulating a misbehaving child. I breathed, adjusted, and made no move. I was here now. When my mother stood at the lectern during prayer requests, she cleared her throat. She asked the congregation, in hushed tones, to pray for Judith's pride and secrecy. Murmurs followed immediately. The pastor hesitated, awkwardly shifted his papers, attempted to shift the momentum, but the damage was done. Heads turned, cameras hidden in cell phones shifted. Whispers echoed near the aisle. They think if they can control my reputation, they can control my choices. I stayed still, eyes scanning. Several people averted their gaze. Others looked at me with pity. I wondered how many had always seen through them, and how few dared say it. After service, I lingered near the back door. My father approached, careful steps, paternal posture. "We're worried about you, Judith," he said softly. "You've changed since all this money stuff." He smiled like it was friendly. I didn't smile back. "You mean since I stopped needing your permission to breathe?" He stiffened, but pressed on. The bystanders paused. A neighbor, perhaps, glanced our way. "You're making waves," Dana's voice joined. "You think your silence means strength?" "It's not weakness." Her tone was a blade disguised as concern. I met her gaze. "I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly who's trying to make me small again." The church grounds felt heavy in silence. They expected tears. They expected breakdown. I gave them nothing. I just stood, calm, letting them see that my boundaries were not negotiable. When I got home, I found the old Bible my grandmother once held, its leather cracked, edges frayed. Inside was a folded note I had tucked decades ago. It read, "Your voice is sacred. Use it wisely." I touched those words and felt the weight of every time I swallowed mine. I opened my journal. Page after page, I wrote down every hurt, every comment, every controlling gesture they'd ever laid on me. They weren't targets now. They were witnesses. Silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. Later, I drafted a message to the pastor, not to shame, to inform, to explain why I left church early so many weeks, why I hadn't taken communion. It was not faith lost. It was faith redefined. I didn't send it. I saved it. I created a private journal titled Inheritance of Scars. No one reads it but me, and possibly my lawyer. I planted a seed, told David that if things escalated publicly, I wanted a press memo ready. They would not control my narrative. Night came. Dana's message arrived. "You really think this ends with you?" I stared. Thought of 10 years ago, when I cried silent tears in my bathroom. Then forwarded the message. Subject, Phase 2. Straight to David's email. They had lit the match. Now I held the full fire. I gathered them quietly in my living room, just cousins and nieces, the ones I believed still remembered my heart. We sat close, voices low. I looked at them all. Caroline, the niece who'd always kept her opinions to herself. Marcus, who once asked me for help with tuition. Helena, who never sided with my mother. Their faces held uncertainty and loyalty in equal measure. I realized then, they forgot how many watched when I stood mute. Now I asked myself who would stand with me. Caroline spoke. She recalled how I quietly covered her rent senior year so she wouldn't drop out. Small gestures. She said she hadn't forgotten. The room was tense. I felt the weight of shifting underfoot. Power wasn't static anymore. At the family meeting held later that afternoon in my parents' living room, Delphine rose first. Her voice was calm but ironclad. "Eve, if you do not relinquish control of your company to our family board," she said, "you will be expelled from all inheritance and legacy entitlements." Her words hung in the air. She claimed unity, claimed responsibility, but I heard dominance in her tone. Morel joined in, citing public image, tax burdens, perception. The pressure built, suffocating. I sat unmoving, absorbing the storm. My heart pounded, but I refused to respond. Let them hang in suspense a moment. This was not duty, it was control. Then Cassian spoke. He rose quietly from his seat, unexpected, deliberate. He exposed the bluff. The family board clause was drafted after my success. He proved he'd vetted my company's financials and protections. He said he refused offers made to Morel that I had turned down to honor my boundary between family and business. The room gasped. Mother's face flickered. Sister paled. "You can't ask for loyalty while plotting betrayal," he said softly, yet with firmness that cracked glass. I felt vindicated. Their illusion cracked. I saw the masked fear behind their postures. I stood then, my voice steady. I read aloud the codicil, my grandmother's words, her wishes in ink they tried to bury. I refused the ultimatum. I rejected the idea that they deserved my success more than I earned it. I pointed to every document they'd hidden, every clause they danced around. "I will keep my autonomy," I said, "but I remain open, only if mutual respect is your foundation." My quiet power drew their gaze. They felt it dripping from my bones. In a breath, Morel stormed out, calling me self-righteous. Father stood shocked. Mother's mask cracked. I glimpsed trembling at the corners of her mouth. One aunt, timid, touched my arm. A tentative gesture. I saw it. Allegiance shifting. Power is not given. It's surrendered. One choice at a time. My phone buzzed sharply. My attorney's name flashed. The message said, "Court has accepted temporary restraining order." My mother's mouth opened, then closed. I looked at her. I smiled. "We begin tomorrow." I stared at the note in my hand, my mother's handwriting, curling slightly at the edges. Private reconciliation dinner, 7 p.m., the Crescent Room. Please. It felt too formal, too prepared. Still, I agreed. Sometimes the only way out is through. I dressed in power. Tailored jacket, crisp blouse. I slipped a small recorder into my purse, concealed. In the rearview mirror, I watched my reflection, steady. The restaurant was in Charlotte, an upscale southern place with polished wood, soft lighting, framed landscapes of rolling hills. Too perfect, too clean. I sat there waiting. My mind revolved around suspicion more than hope. If peace came with terms, I knew better than to sign. When they began, it felt rehearsed. My father opened with, "We just want our family back." Delphine followed, offering a hollow apology. "If you felt hurt, I regret that." No acknowledgement, no guilt. I heard the subtext, wronged, possibly, guilty, never. Then they slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, a proposal to reintegrate me into family enterprise, but only if I signed a non-disclosure agreement, a legal muzzle masked in civility. I leaned back, my voice silent until that moment. When I spoke, it was soft. When the apology comes with paperwork, it's not peace, it's control. They froze. The waitress paused mid-pour. I asked quietly, "Would you even apologize if I had nothing?" My sister's face twisted. She lunged with, "So now you think we'd never care?" Delphine's kindness dissolved. Shadows of resentment swirled. The mask cracked. I realized the dinner wasn't for healing. It was a recorded audition. I activated my recorder, voice unsteady but firm. This is now a formal response. I stood, calm, strong. You don't invite someone to dinner to cage them. As I walked to the door, the waiter caught my arm gently. "I recognize you," he whispered. "My aunt told me your story at church," He pressed a napkin into my palm. On it, a name. A former staff member, willing to testify. Truth echoed louder than money. Not everyone stayed silent. Back at home, I sat at my desk under lamplight. I cataloged every word, every gesture from the dinner. Voice memos, notes, the contract. Everything went to Cassian and David. I drafted a press leak. I drafted a blog post. The line between my voice and their optics blurred. They play checkers. I play chess. And then Cassian called. His voice calm, measured. I just got a copy of that contract, he said. There's a second clause about your inheritance. I folded my hands, closed my eyes. The morning air smelled different here. Fresher, honest. I moved slower now, not because of age or exhaustion, but because I didn't have to run anymore. The kettle hissed as I cracked 2 eggs into a skillet, jazz playing low in the background. Just me, a cup of black coffee, and the quiet hum of peace I never knew I craved until I had it. My phone buzzed once. A letter had arrived, Cassian's mother. She wrote with such warmth, telling me, in her old-school cursive, that she saw me as family. Not an addition, not a burden, just family. I sat at the kitchen table and let the letter rest open beside me. Outside, the hills of Asheville rolled gently, fog lifting like curtains pulled back on a new act. It was August, but the air carried the first whisper of fall. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just breathed it in. That was enough. Closure wasn't always handed to you in apologies or courtroom wins. Sometimes it came in eggs and silence. Sometimes you give it to yourself. By mid-morning, Cassian's legal team confirmed everything. The coercion, the forged documentation, the inheritance funds rerouted without consent. All of it. There would be no more meetings, no more dinners cloaked in lies. I signed the final cease and desist. From now on, they'd have to go through legal channels if they wanted anything. A check was mailed, restitution, not reconciliation. My final gesture, I wrote one last letter to my parents, just facts, no emotion, no lingering wounds dressed up in forgiveness. They wouldn't find me begging. That chapter was done. But there was one more twist left, and it wasn't revenge, it was truth. I created a foundation with the majority of my inheritance, focused solely on helping women like me, women discarded by their own kin, women who'd learned to survive without family but still needed tools to thrive. The name wasn't mine, it belonged to no one. That was the point. Sunday came, and I went to church. Alone. The same building where I'd once been shamed. But something had shifted. A new pastor stood at the pulpit, young but grounded. He spoke about grace. Not cheap grace. Grace that required separation. And I felt it. That old ache finally loosening its grip. No one whispered when I walked in. A few even nodded. I didn't need their validation, but I won't lie. It felt good not to be erased. Before I left, I tucked a worn journal into the church's lost and found box. No name on it, just pages filled with my story. If someone found it, maybe they'd feel less alone. That evening, Cassian and I sat on the porch with 2 glasses of wine. The sky was soft orange, cicadas humming somewhere in the trees. He turned to me, slow and thoughtful, and said, "Let's travel, not to escape anything, just to explore." We didn't talk about marriage or kids. That wasn't our lane. Instead, we talked about building something, hosting retreats, mentoring, teaching resilience without bitterness. Cassian told me he bought the land next to mine, said he wanted to build a wellness center in my name. I shook my head. "Let's build it together," I told him. "But not in my name, in our mission. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you live while you're still here." Later that night, I sat in my office with the mic in front of me. My laptop glowed. I leaned in, took a deep breath, and recorded the first episode of our Nonprofits podcast. "If you're listening and you've ever been erased," I said, "I want you to know Your voice is the start of your revolution. I hit publish. The sun was rising again.